If you're over 60 and have spent entire nights staring at the ceiling, tossing from side to side without managing to sleep, you're not alone. Millions of people discover that once they pass 60, sleep simply disappears, and with it, their energy, patience, and zest for life. But what if I told you there's a straightforward routine, just 7 minutes long, that can turn your nights of torture into truly restorative rest? Margareth was a frequent visitor to my office, especially after she developed insomnia at 65. After trying several alternative treatments, we decided to implement the method you're about to learn, one that could change your life. As a physician specializing in sleep disorders, I've seen hundreds of patients over the years, but few cases have affected me as deeply as Margareth's. She walked into my office one morning with slumped shoulders and deep circles under her eyes, clear evidence of months spent in sleepless misery. At 65, she should have been radiant, enjoying her husband Frank's recent retirement and the plans they'd made for this new stage of life. Instead, I saw an exhausted woman who looked as though she'd aged years in just a matter of months. One of the scenes Margareth described was how often she would wake up and glance at the digital clock on her nightstand at around 3:47 a.m. The red numbers seemed to mock her in the darkness of the bedroom. Beside her, her husband Frank slept soundly, his steady, peaceful breathing a stark contrast to the restlessness that had overtaken her body. During our conversation, Margareth described in detail how insomnia had become a silent enemy, destroying her quality of life. She told me about the endless nights spent pacing through the house, brewing teas that did nothing, trying techniques she'd found on the internet. It had been like that every night for nearly 2 years. Since she turned 63, sleep, which once arrived easily after a day tending the garden or watching the grandchildren, had become a rare and capricious visitor. Margaret even joked with her friends that she was in a fight with her pillow, but the truth was that the situation was anything but funny. Margaret told me it all began gradually. At first, it was only a few nights a week when sleep took longer to arrive. She didn't think much of it. After all, changes in sleep patterns were expected with aging. But what had been occasional became constant, and what had been a mere inconvenience turned into daily torture. On one of those nights, Margareth rose carefully, trying not to wake Frank, and walked to the kitchen. The house was wrapped in that heavy pre-dawn silence, broken only by the faint hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the living room clock. She brewed a cup of chamomile tea, something she'd read in a magazine might help, and sat at the kitchen table gazing through the window at the sleeping neighborhood. It wasn't fair. At 65, Margaret should have been enjoying this stage of life. Frank had retired the year before, and they had plans: travel to visit her sister in Oregon, remodel the back porch, maybe even adopt a dog. But how can you make plans when every day starts with the feeling you've been hit by a truck? What struck me most was how the lack of sleep was affecting every aspect of Margareth's life. Her concentration was compromised, and everyday tasks turned into monumental challenges. Frank had begun taking over responsibilities that had once been hers, such as making breakfast and organizing the family's schedule. I'm no longer the grandmother I wanted to be. I'm no longer the wife Frank deserves. I feel like I'm watching my life go by in slow motion because of sleep deprivation. No matter how hard she tried to keep up appearances, Margareth knew she was losing important parts of herself. Her memory was failing. She forgot appointments, the names of neighbors she'd known for years, even where she'd left the car keys. The organized, efficient woman she had always been was turning into someone she didn't recognize. Her daytime energy was virtually non-existent. The family physician, Dr. Henderson, had suggested a few sleep medications, but Margareth was afraid of becoming dependent. She'd seen friends who started with a single pill and years later needed progressively larger doses just to manage a few hours of sleep. Besides, the side effects left her feeling as though she were in a fog the next day. Margareth tried everything she found in magazines and online. Warm milk before bed, hot baths, counting sheep, breathing exercises she'd learned from a YouTube video. She bought an aroma diffuser and filled the bedroom with lavender essence. She changed the mattress, swapped the pillows, and installed blackout curtains. Nothing worked. Finishing her tea, Margareth glanced at the kitchen clock again. 4:15 a.m. In less than 3 hours, Frank would wake up for his morning walk, and she would pretend she'd slept well. Yet another day would begin with that sinking feeling of operating on only half the energy she needed. As she returned to the bedroom, Margareth made a silent promise to herself. Something had to change. She couldn't keep living like this, watching her life unfold in slow motion because of sleeplessness. There was a solution somewhere. She was sure of it. She just had to find it. She lay back down and closed her eyes, trying once more to find her way to sleep. Outside, the first birds had begun to sing, announcing that yet another sleepless night had come and gone. In the weeks following our first appointment, Margareth and I embarked on a journey through the conventional treatments for insomnia. As medical protocol dictates, we began with the most common and widely recommended options. I hoped that one of these traditional approaches might bring her relief, but what we discovered was a succession of frustrations that only deepened her despair. The first attempt was with low-dose sleeping medication. I prescribed a mild drug, carefully explaining the possible side effects and the importance of using it only when necessary. Margareth left the office with a look of cautious relief. Maybe finally she would get a few nights of restorative sleep. When she returned to the office, Margareth reported that the medication had worked during the first few nights, letting her sleep as she hadn't in years. But in the weeks that followed, the insomnia was as bad as ever. Moreover, medication didn't seem like the best option for her, and she voiced an understandable fear. She had seen friends who started with low doses and, over the years, had to increase the amount gradually just to achieve the same effect. My neighbor Dorothy takes 3 different pills now and still complains she doesn't sleep properly, she told me. I don't want to become dependent on medication for the rest of my life. Next, we turned to cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, an approach that teaches techniques to identify and modify the thoughts and behaviors that interfere with sleep. Margareth attended every session with the specialist therapist religiously, learned relaxation techniques, practiced deep breathing exercises, and even kept a detailed journal of her sleep patterns. However, during this process, I began to explain to Margareth something fundamental about insomnia after age 60, and it will certainly make sense to you as well. From that age onward, our bodies undergo significant changes that directly affect sleep quality. The production of melatonin, the hormone responsible for regulating our sleep cycle, naturally decreases. In addition, the circadian rhythm, our internal biological clock, becomes less efficient. To make this easier to understand, let's walk through it step by step. What many people don't realize is that insomnia in mature adults often has very specific chemical roots in the brain. Think of your brain as a natural pharmacy that produces the substances vital for sleep. After age 60, that pharmacy begins to manufacture less of the compounds that help us feel calm and relaxed, while increasing production of those that keep us alert and worried, especially during the early hours of the morning. This explains why so many mature adults wake up consistently between 3 and 5 a.m., exactly when the natural cortisol peak coincides with a melatonin dip. For people like Margareth, this isn't merely a matter of sleep hygiene or poor habits, it's a biological reality that calls for a different approach. Over years of clinical experience, I've observed that conventional treatments work well for insomnia caused by temporary stress or poor habits. But when it comes to the neural and chemical changes associated with aging, we need methods that work with these biological shifts, not against them. That was why, after weeks of trying traditional approaches with Margareth, I realized we needed something different. Her insomnia had clear neurological characteristics that required a technique capable of directly influencing neurotransmitters and her circadian rhythm in a natural way. The lowest point came when she sought me out after an especially difficult week. "Doctor, I think I'm losing my mind," she said, tears in her eyes. "Yesterday I was so tired, I forgot my own grandson's name for a few seconds. Tommy was talking to me, and I just couldn't remember what to call him. He noticed and looked confused. I felt like the worst grandmother in the world." It was at that moment that I knew we had to think outside the box. Conventional treatments, though effective for many people, clearly weren't working for the specific kind of insomnia Margareth had. But then, something unexpected happened. It was then that I recalled a casual conversation I'd had a few years earlier at an integrative medicine conference. A fellow specialist had mentioned a simple technique that was yielding remarkable results with patients exactly like Margareth. At the time, I admit I noted it down only out of curiosity, never imagining it would one day become the key to helping a desperate patient. When conventional treatments don't work for patients like Margareth, it's no accident. There is a very specific scientific reason for this, and understanding that reason is crucial to finding the right solution. If you're over 60 and have tried sleeping medications, breathing techniques, calming teas, or routine changes without lasting success, here's what you need to know. The problem isn't that you lack willpower. The problem is that these methods were developed without taking into account the specific changes that occur in the brain after the age of 60. I'll put it simply. Picture your brain as an old radio. When we were younger, that radio easily picked up the sleep station. Just turn the dial and there it was. After 60, though, it's as if the antenna has shifted. You can still catch a few stations, but the sleep station is filled with static, cuts out in the middle of the night, or simply won't tune in properly. Conventional treatments try to turn up the volume on that faulty radio, when what we really need to do is adjust the antenna. That's exactly what happens when we take sleeping pills. They force sleep, but they don't fix the underlying problem. Here's what really happens. After 60, your brain undergoes a natural reprogramming. It's as if the sleep control system has been rewired, leaving you tired during the day, yet inexplicably alert in the middle of the night. Your body produces energy at the wrong time and relaxation at the wrong time. The most frustrating part is that this creates a vicious cycle. The harder you try to force sleep, the more anxious you become. The more anxious you get, the less your brain can produce its natural relaxation substances. It's like trying to fall asleep in a room where someone is shouting, "Sleep now!" Impossible. That's exactly what I explained to Margareth when she returned to the office, more discouraged than ever. "Margareth," I said, "the problem isn't that nothing works for you. The problem is that everything we've tried so far was created for a different kind of insomnia." And that was when I decided to introduce her to a completely different method, a simple 7-minute technique designed to work with the brain's chemical changes after 60. It's no longer a method that tries to force sleep. It's one that teaches your brain to return to the natural rhythm it had when you were younger. "But doctor," she asked me, "how can a 7-minute technique solve something that medication and therapies couldn't?" And it was precisely that question that gave me the opportunity to explain how this method works in a completely different way from everything she had tried before. The answer lies in working with your body, not against it. Instead of trying to suppress those early morning awakenings, you learn to use them as a time to recalibrate your brain. It's like resetting that old radio so it can tune back into the sleep station perfectly. After explaining all the theory to Margareth, it was time to teach the method itself. If you've made it this far, you're probably asking, but what exactly are those 7 minutes? The answer is simpler than you might imagine, yet more powerful than any technique you've tried before. The method is built on one fundamental principle. When you wake up in the middle of the night, your brain is sending a signal. It isn't a sign that something is wrong. It's a sign that it's time for a fine-tuning of your nervous system. It's as if your body were asking for a little maintenance. Margareth, I explained, when you wake up at 3:47 a.m., and yes, you can keep that time as a reference, don't look at the clock. Don't get frustrated. Accept that you've woken up and immediately begin the 7-minute sequence. I grabbed a piece of paper and began sketching it out for her, breaking the method into 3 precise steps. The first step lasts exactly 2 minutes and consists of subtle movements you perform while still lying in bed. You start by rotating your ankles in circles, 10 times in each direction, then rotate your wrists the same way. These movements stimulate specific points that your body recognizes as signals that it's time to relax. The second step lasts 3 minutes and is called rhythmic breathing, and you can practice it right now while watching this video. This is the most important part of the method. You'll breathe very simply. Inhale slowly for a count of 4, hold for 4, exhale even more slowly for a count of 6, and rest for 2 seconds. Repeat this cycle calmly. I practiced this step with Margaret for a few minutes. At first, she struggled with the timing, but she soon found her rhythm. "Doctor, I feel like my heart is calming down," she said, surprised. This breathing pattern activates what we call your body's rest system. It's as if you were telling your brain, "It's okay, you can relax now." The third and final step lasts 2 minutes and involves a specific visualization. You will create a very particular mental image. Picture yourself in a cozy cabin with a gentle fireplace. Outside, it's raining, but it's a warm, gentle summer rain. You feel completely safe and warm, watching the droplets on the window and listening to the soothing sound of the rain. Margareth closed her eyes and smiled softly. "I can almost feel the fireplace's warmth and hear the rain," she murmured. This visualization works because it combines 3 elements the brain associates with complete safety: shelter, the cabin; warmth, the fireplace; and rhythmic sound, the rain. That creates the ideal mental environment for your body to naturally produce the relaxation chemicals. What sets this method apart from everything you've tried before is the specific sequence and precise timing. These aren't just random exercises. Each step primes your brain for the next, creating a cascade of relaxation that works specifically with the chemical changes that occur after the age of 60. Margareth, the secret lies in doing exactly as I'm teaching you, in the correct order, for the exact amount of time, I emphasized. Your brain needs to learn this new pattern, and that only happens with precise repetition. When we finished the session, Margareth looked genuinely excited for the first time in months. "Doctor, when should I start?" "Start tonight. But remember, don't expect miraculous results after the first night. Your brain needs time to learn this new pattern. Some people feel a difference within the first week. Others may take up to 3 weeks to notice significant changes. The most important thing I explained to her, and that I need to explain to you as well, is that this method isn't a magic cure. It's training. You're literally teaching your brain to return to the natural sleep patterns it had when you were younger. A week later, I received a call that completely changed my perspective on Margareth's case. It was her, but her voice sounded different, brighter, lighter. "Doctor, I have to tell you what happened last night." Margareth explained that she had followed the method religiously all week. The first 3 nights were frustrating. She woke at her usual time, completed the full 7-minute sequence, but still took hours to fall back asleep. "I almost gave up on the 4th night," she confessed. "I thought it would be just another technique that wouldn't work for me." But then something changed. On the 5th night, after finishing the sequence, Margareth noticed her mind was no longer racing as usual. "It was as if my thoughts had slowed down," she told me. "And more importantly, that terrible dryness in my eyes I always felt in the early hours had eased a lot. My eyes felt naturally more moist and relaxed. I still took some time to drift off, but it wasn't the same agony as before. The sixth night brought an even bigger surprise. Margareth woke up at her usual time, went through the 7-minute routine, and simply fell asleep. Doctor, I couldn't believe it. The next thing I knew, Frank was waking me for breakfast. I had slept from 4 in the morning until 9, 5 straight hours. That might sound insignificant to someone who has never endured chronic insomnia, but for a person who hadn't slept more than 2 straight hours in the middle of the night for 2 years, 5 hours was a miracle. Margareth was so moved she cried on the phone. I felt like a normal person for the first time in so long. Frank noticed the difference immediately as well. He said I woke up smiling, Margareth told me. It had been so long since that happened that he was worried, asking if I was all right. Her daytime energy was completely different. Margareth was able to tackle tasks she had abandoned months ago. But what impressed me the most was the change in her outlook. Doctor, for the first time in 2 years, I'm not afraid of bedtime. I know that if I wake up in the middle of the night, I have something to do that really works. I'm no longer anxious about the night ahead. If you've gotten this far, you're probably asking yourself, but doctor, would this really work for me? That is exactly the question I hear most often in my office. And the answer is surprising. In my clinical experience, people who identify with Margareth's symptoms have an impressive success rate with this method. Let me be honest with you. When I first started applying this technique with other patients, I had my doubts too. After all, how could something so simple succeed where complex treatments had failed? Yet the results were consistent and in many cases even faster than Margareth's. Now you might be thinking, I've tried so many things that didn't work. I understand completely. The frustration of testing method after method without success is devastating. But here's what makes this approach different. It doesn't try to fight your body. It works with the natural changes that happen after the age of 60. What you need to understand is that your insomnia is probably not your fault or a lack of discipline. If you consistently wake up at similar times during the night, if your mind races when it should be relaxing, if you've tried medications and conventional techniques without lasting success, then you're dealing with the same kind of neurological change Margareth faced. And here's an important question I want to ask you. How many more nights are you willing to spend awake before trying something that could change your life? How many more mornings do you want to wake up feeling as though you've been hit by a truck? The 7-minute method isn't miraculous, but it is transformative. The difference is that it was designed specifically to work with the biology of the mature brain. When you understand this, everything makes sense. Your body isn't broken. It simply needs a different approach. Perhaps you're wondering whether it's really that simple. The answer is yes and no. Yes, it's simple to carry out. No, it's not automatic. It requires consistency and patience. But the real complexity lies in the science behind the method, not in its execution. After Margareth's impressive results, I spent weeks delving deeper into why this specific 7-minute technique worked so effectively when other methods had failed. What I discovered was fascinating and perfectly explained the success she had experienced. The key lies in how the method works directly with the neurological changes that occur after the age of 60. When you wake up in the middle of the night, your brain is in a state scientists call hypervigilance, as if an internal alarm system were active, keeping you on alert even when you should be asleep. The science behind the gentle ankle and wrist movements is compelling. These specific points on the body connect directly to what we call the relaxation command center, a part of the nervous system that, after 60, needs more direct stimulation to function properly. Rhythmic breathing, in turn, acts as a natural reset for your internal system. This specific pattern, inhale, hold, exhale more slowly, pause, creates perfect synchronization among the heart, lungs, and brain. It's like tuning a musical instrument. When everything is in harmony, the music flows naturally. But here is the most interesting part. The cabin and rain visualization engages a specific brain area called the prefrontal cortex. This region is responsible for controlling anxiety and racing thoughts. When you mentally create the image of total safety, shelter, warmth, and the rhythmic sound of rain, you are literally switching off the worry circuits. What makes all of this even more effective for people over 60 is that the method targets the hormonal changes of that age group. Remember when I explained how the production of certain relaxing substances declines with age? This technique naturally stimulates the production of those very substances. During the weeks following Margareth's success, I began applying the method with other patients who presented similar symptoms. The results were consistently positive. Martha, 68, who had struggled with insomnia for 5 years, started sleeping better in the second week. Robert, 71, cut his use of sleeping medication in half in just 1 month. The pattern was always similar. During the first nights, patients felt a reduction in anxiety during their nocturnal awakenings. In the first or second week, they began to fall back asleep more quickly. After 3 to 4 weeks, most reported a significant improvement in overall sleep quality. What impressed me most was how the method created a positive cycle. The better they slept, the less anxious they felt about sleep. The less anxious they were, the more easily they could apply the technique when needed. It was as if they were gradually rebuilding confidence in their own bodies to sleep naturally. And do you know the best part? There are no side effects. You're not taking medication. You're not doing anything that could harm your health. In the worst-case scenario, you will have spent a few weeks practicing a relaxation technique that will at least reduce your nighttime anxiety. But let me give you a piece of advice based on years of experience. If you decide to try, commit fully for at least 3 weeks. Don't test it for 2 or 3 days and give up. Your brain needs time to learn this new pattern. It's like learning to drive. At first it seems complicated, but then it becomes automatic. The question you need to ask yourself isn't, will it work? But rather, am I willing to try something that could change my life? Because the truth is, you already know that staying as you are is not an option. How many more nights do you want to spend awake? How many more mornings do you want to wake up feeling exhausted? I remember a patient who told me, "Doctor, if I'd known the solution was this simple, I would have sought help years ago." Don't make the same mistake. Your quality of life after 60 doesn't have to be compromised by insomnia. Now that you understand how the method works in practice, let me explain the final technical details that make this approach so effective. The secret lies in neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to create new connections even after the age of 60. When you practice the 7-minute sequence consistently, you are literally training your brain to recognize a new pattern. The combination of the 3 elements, movement, breathing, and visualization, creates what we call a neurochemical cascade. It's a complete restoration process for your sleep system. The 7-minute timing isn't arbitrary either. Studies show that this is the ideal length of time to activate the relaxation response without creating anxiety about the duration of the practice. And now, I'll make a personal confession. I use this technique myself. At 64, I began to notice changes in my own sleep pattern. As a physician, I knew this was natural, but as a person, it was frustrating to wake up at 3 a.m., worrying about patients or work issues. When I started applying the 7-minute method to myself, I experienced exactly what my patients reported. The first week was an adjustment, but by the second week I noticed a significant difference. Today, I use the technique whenever necessary, and I can state with absolute conviction it works. The most important thing I've learned is that insomnia after 60 is not an inevitable sentence. It's a condition that can be reversed. Modern medicine sometimes complicates solutions that could be simple. This method combines the best of ancient wisdom with modern scientific understanding. It's neither alternative nor conventional. It's integrative, embracing what truly works. So my final question to you is this. After everything I've explained, after all the cases I've shared, after understanding the science behind the method, are you ready to give your sleep recovery a real chance? Not just try it for a few nights, but commit fully to the process for the necessary time. Your life after 60 can be filled with energy, joy, and peaceful nights of restorative sleep. The choice is now yours. The 7-minute method is here, tested, proven, and available. The only question that remains is, when will you start? I'll be waiting to hear about the results you achieve with this method. I want to know how your experience went, how many days it took before you noticed the first changes, and how it transformed not just your sleep but your overall quality of life. If this content has been helpful to you, remember to follow our channel for more science-based insights that can transform your health and well-being after 60. Together, we'll debunk the notion that issues like insomnia are just part of aging and show that there's always a solution when we use the right approach.